The girl couldn't have been more than 12, but her eyes belonged to someone much older. She stood at the edge of Thomas Mercer's porch, silhouetted against the fading amber light of a September evening, holding the reins of a sway-backed mare that looked ready to collapse. Behind her, barely visible in the growing dusk, sat a boy. Smaller, younger, silent. He didn't dismount. He didn't speak. He just watched Thomas with the kind of stillness that came from learning early that the world was dangerous. "Can we sleep in your barn?" the girl asked. Her voice didn't waver. Kucha. No pleading, no desperation. Just a question flat and practiced, like she'd asked it before and been turned away more times than she could count. Thomas stood in the doorway, one hand still gripping the frame, the other loose at his side. He was a man built from the land itself, broad-shouldered, weathered, with hands scarred from years of mending fence wire and breaking stubborn horses. His hair had gone silver at the temples, and his face carried the deep lines of a man who'd lived through more silence than conversation. He should have said no? That was the smart answer. The safe answer. A rancher living alone 20 miles from the nearest town didn't take in strangers, especially not children with hollow eyes and no explanation. Especially not in times like these when the territory was still bleeding from war, still crawling with deserters and drifters, and men who'd forgotten what it meant to live without violence. But Thomas didn't say no. He looked past the girl, at the boy on the horse. The kid's face was pale, his lips chapped and cracked. His shirt hung loose on his frame, and his feet, bare Thomas noticed, dangled limp against the mare's ribs. "How long since you ate?" Thomas asked. The girl's jaw tightened. "We're fine. That wasn't what I asked." She didn't answer. Instead, she glanced over her shoulder at the boy, some silent communication passing between them. When she turned back, her expression was harder. "We won't steal nothing. We'll be gone by dawn." Thomas exhaled slowly through his nose. The smart thing would be to give them a blanket, point them toward the barn, and close the door. Let them rest, let them leave, let them become someone else's problem. But the boy's face. Thomas had seen that look before. In his own reflection years ago when he was young and the world had taken everything from him and left him standing in the ruins, wondering if survival was worth the cost. "Barn's full of hay bales," Thomas said finally. "Gets cold at night. You'll freeze out there." The girl's eyes narrowed, suspicious. "There's a room inside," Thomas continued, nodding toward the house behind him. "Used to be my daughter's. Hasn't been used in a long time, but the bed's still good. You can sleep there." "We don't eat, and there's stew on the stove," Thomas said, cutting her off. "Still hot. You'll eat before you sleep." For the first time, the girl's composure cracked. Her mouth opened, closed. Her fingers tightened on the reins, knuckles going white. "Why?" she whispered. Thomas didn't have a good answer, not one that made sense anyway. So he just stepped aside, holding the door open, because it's the right thing to do. The girl's name was Clara. The boy was her brother, Samuel. She didn't offer their last name, and Thomas didn't ask. They sat at his kitchen table like wild animals brought indoors, tense, ready to bolt, eyes darting toward the door every few seconds. Clara kept one hand on Samuel's shoulder, protective, while Thomas ladled stew into 2 chipped bowls and set them down without ceremony. "Eat slow," he said. "You eat too fast after going hungry, you'll just bring it back up." Clara frowned but didn't argue. She picked up a spoon, tested the stew cautiously, then nudged Samuel. The boy ate in silence, mechanically, his gaze never leaving his bowl. Thomas didn't sit with them. He stood by the stove, arms crossed, watching without watching. The girl was older than he'd first thought, maybe 14, though hunger and exhaustion had a way of making people look younger. She had dark hair tied back in a loose braid and freckles scattered across her nose and cheeks. Her dress was patched in 3 places, and her boots were 2 sizes too big. Samuel looked about 8. His hair was lighter than his sister's, almost blonde, and his face was gaunt. He didn't speak. Not once. Thomas wondered if he couldn't, or if he just wouldn't. "Where are your parents?" Thomas asked finally. Clara's spoon stopped halfway to her mouth. She set it down carefully, deliberately. "Dead." The word hung in the air like smoke. "How long?" 3 months, maybe 4, Thomas nodded slowly. "And you've been on your own since then?" Clara's jaw tightened again, that same defensiveness creeping back into her posture. "We've been fine. I can see that." She glared at him, but there was no heat in it. Just exhaustion. "We'll leave in the morning," she said. "We won't cause trouble. Didn't say you would." Then why are you helping us? Thomas turned away, pouring himself a cup of coffee from the pot on the stove. He took a slow sip, letting the silence stretch. Because someone helped me once, he said finally. A long time ago, when I needed it. Clara didn't respond. She just went back to her stew, though Thomas noticed her hands were trembling slightly. He gave them the room upstairs, the one with the small bed and the quilt his wife had stitched before the fever took her. The one with the wooden rocking horse in the corner, gathering dust. The one he hadn't opened in 5 years. Clara hesitated at the threshold, staring at the room like it might disappear if she blinked. "This is too much," she whispered. "It's a bed," Thomas said. Nothing more. She turned to look at him, and for a moment her mask slipped. Beneath the hard edges and the practiced wariness, she was just a kid, scared, tired, trying so damn hard to keep her brother safe. "Thank you," she said quietly. Thomas nodded once, then turned and walked back downstairs, closing the door behind him. He didn't sleep that night. He sat in his chair by the fire, rifle across his lap, listening to the wind rattle the shutters and wondering what kind of trouble he'd just invited into his home. But when morning came and he climbed the stairs to check on them, the bed was empty. The window was open. And Clara and Samuel were gone. Thomas found the note on the kitchen table. It was written in careful, cramped handwriting on a torn piece of brown paper, the kind used for wrapping supplies at the general store. The letters were uneven, some smudged, like the writer's hand had been shaking. "Thank you for the food and the bed. We didn't take nothing. We won't forget your kindness. No signature, no explanation." Thomas stood over the table, staring at the note for a long time. The coffee pot on the stove had gone cold. The fire in the hearth had burned down to embers. Outside, the sun was already climbing, washing the valley in pale gold light. They'd left in the night, quiet, careful, like ghosts. He should have felt relieved. They were gone, and his life could return to its familiar rhythm, feeding the horses, mending fences, sitting alone at the table with nothing but the wind for company. No complications, no questions, but relief wasn't what he felt. He folded the note carefully and slipped it into his shirt pocket. Then he grabbed his hat, his rifle, and walked out to the barn to saddle his horse. Their trail wasn't hard to follow. The mare they'd been riding left deep prints in the soft earth near the creek, and Clara hadn't bothered to cover their tracks. Either she didn't know how, or she hadn't expected anyone to come looking. Thomas followed the trail east, toward the low hills that rolled toward the border. The land out here was scrubby and wild, dotted with juniper and sagebrush, and the sun beat down mercilessly as the morning stretched into midday. He found them an hour later, stopped in the shade of a rocky outcrop. Clara was kneeling beside Samuel, trying to coax him to drink from a canteen. The boy sat slumped against the rock, his face pale and slick with sweat. The mare stood a few feet away, head low, ribs heaving. Clara looked up sharply when she heard Thomas approach, her hand darting to something at her waist. A knife, Thomas realized. Small, dull, probably meant for cutting rope or leather, but she held it like a weapon. "Stay back," she said. Thomas reined his horse to a stop, keeping his distance. He raised one hand slowly, showing he meant no harm. "Easy," he said. "I'm not here to hurt you." "Then why are you here?" "Because you left without saying goodbye." Clara's grip on the knife didn't loosen. "We didn't steal nothing. I told you we wouldn't." "I know." "Then why did you follow us?" Thomas dismounted slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and calm. He tied his horse to a nearby juniper, then crouched down a few feet away, so he was at eye level with her. "Your brother's sick," he said. Clara's face went tight. "He's fine. He's burning up. I can see it from here. He just needs rest. He needs water, food, a real bed, and probably a doctor. Clara's hand trembled, and for a moment, Thomas thought she might actually use the knife. But then her shoulders sagged, and the fight drained out of her all at once. "We don't have money for a doctor," she whispered. "I'm not asking for money." She looked up at him, her eyes red-rimmed and wet. "Why are you doing this?" Thomas didn't answer right away. He looked past her at Samuel, who was barely conscious now, his breathing shallow and labored. "Because you're kids," Thomas said finally, "and you shouldn't have to do this alone." Clara's face crumpled, and she let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. "We don't have a choice. You do now." She stared at him, disbelief and hope warring in her expression. "You're serious?" "Come back with me," Thomas said. "Let me help you." "For how long?" "As long as it takes." "Oh." Clara looked down at Samuel, then back at Thomas. Her hand finally loosened on the knife, and she let it fall to the dirt. "Okay," she whispered. By the time they made it back to the ranch, Samuel was delirious. Thomas carried him inside and laid him on the bed upstairs, then sent Clara to fetch water from the well. He stripped the boy down to his undershirt, checking for injuries, for signs of infection. There was a gash on Samuel's left foot, angry and red, the edges puffy with pus. It had probably started as a blister, then turned into something worse. Thomas cleaned the wound as best he could, wrapping it in clean cloth soaked in whiskey. Samuel whimpered in his sleep but didn't wake. Clara stood in the doorway, pale and trembling. "Is he going to die?" she asked. "Not if I can help it," Thomas said. He stayed by the boy's side through the night, changing the dressing every few hours, dripping water onto his cracked lips whenever he stirred. Clara curled up in the corner of the room, refusing to leave, and eventually fell asleep sitting up, her head resting against the wall. By morning, the fever broke. Samuel's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy, and he looked around the room like he didn't know where he was. "Clara?" he whispered. His sister was at his side in an instant, gripping his hand. "I'm here," she said, her voice thick with relief. "I'm right here." Samuel blinked slowly, then turned his head toward Thomas. "Who's that?" Clara hesitated, then smiled, small, fragile, but real. "That's Mr. Mercer," she said. "He's helping us." Samuel studied Thomas for a long moment, then nodded, as if that made perfect sense. "Okay," he said, and closed his eyes again. The days that followed were strange. Thomas had lived alone for so long that the sound of other voices in the house felt foreign, almost intrusive. But slowly, reluctantly, he adjusted. Clara was careful at first, almost painfully polite. She helped with chores without being asked, scrubbed dishes until they gleamed, and kept Samuel quiet and out of the way. She moved through the house like a guest who knew she might be asked to leave at any moment. But Samuel was different. The boy was curious, restless, full of questions. Once his strength returned, he followed Thomas everywhere, to the barn, to the pasture, to the workshop. He asked about the horses, the tools, the land. He asked about Thomas's life, his family, where he came from. Thomas answered some questions. Others he deflected. But he didn't send the boy away. It was Clara who finally asked the question Thomas had been waiting for. They were sitting on the porch one evening, watching the sun sink below the hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and violet. Samuel was inside, already asleep. "Why are you really doing this?" Clara asked quietly. Thomas didn't look at her. He just stared out at the horizon, hands resting on his knees. "I had a daughter once," he said. "About your age. I buried them out past the creek under the cottonwood tree." He paused, the words catching in his throat. "I couldn't save them," he said, "but maybe I can save you." Clara didn't say anything. She just reached over and placed her hand on top of his. They sat like that until the stars came out. The rider came 3 days later. Thomas saw him from the pasture, a dark shape moving slowly along the road that cut through the valley. The stranger rode a tall black gelding, and even from a distance, Thomas could see the deliberate way he sat in the saddle. Upright, controlled, like a man who knew how to use the rifle strapped to his back. Thomas wiped the sweat from his brow and set down the post he'd been hammering into the ground. He called out to Clara, who was hanging laundry near the house. "Take Samuel inside," he said. "Now." Clara looked up sharply, her hands frozen mid-motion. "What's wrong?" "Just do it." She didn't argue. She grabbed Samuel by the arm and pulled him toward the house, glancing back over her shoulder as she went. Thomas walked slowly toward the road, keeping his movements calm, his hands visible. The rider approached at an easy pace, reining his horse to a stop about 20 feet away. He was younger than Thomas had expected. Mid-30s, maybe, with a lean face and sharp blue eyes. He wore a duster coat despite the heat and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his features. A deputy's badge gleamed on his chest, dull silver in the afternoon light. "Afternoon," the man said. His voice was smooth, pleasant, too pleasant. "Afternoon," Thomas replied. "Name's Deputy Harlan Cole. I'm out of Silver Creek." Thomas nodded slowly. Silver Creek was 2 counties over, a hard ride from here. "Long way from home." "That it is." Cole's gaze drifted past Thomas toward the house. "I'm looking for 2 children, a girl and a boy. Runaways." Thomas's gut tightened, but he kept his expression neutral. "Lots of runaways out here these days." These two are particular, Cole said. Girls about 14, boys younger. They were last seen heading east, maybe 3 weeks ago. Haven't seen anyone like that. Cole smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You sure about that? I'm sure. The deputy studied him for a long moment, then dismounted slowly, looping his horse's reins over a fence post. He walked a few steps closer, hands resting casually on his belt. See, the thing is, Cole said, their uncle's been looking for them. Real worried. Says they ran off after their parents died, and he wants to make sure they're safe. Wants to take them in, give them a proper home. Thomas didn't move. That's so? It is. Cole's smile widened. He's offering a reward. $50 for information. $100 if the children are returned safely. $50. $100. That was more money than most men out here saw in a year. Generous, Thomas said flatly. He's a generous man. Cole took another step closer. Now, I'm not saying you've seen these kids, but if you have, it'd be in everyone's best interest to speak up. Their uncle's a powerful man. He's got friends. He's got influence. And if I told you I haven't seen them, Cole's expression hardened just slightly, then I'd say you're either telling the truth or you're making a mistake. Thomas held his gaze, unblinking. I don't make mistakes. For a moment, the air between them was tight, charged, like the stillness before a storm. Then Cole laughed, a low, humorless sound, and tipped his hat. All right, then, I'll take you at your word. He turned and walked back to his horse, swinging into the saddle with practiced ease. But I'll be around for a few days, asking questions. If you happen to remember anything, you let me know. I will. Cole gave him one last long look, then spurred his horse and rode off down the road, kicking up a trail of dust. Thomas watched until he disappeared over the ridge. Then he turned and walked quickly back to the house. Clara was waiting for him in the kitchen, her face pale. Who was that? She asked. Deputy from Silver Creek. Said he's looking for 2 runaways. Clara's breath hitched. He's lying. About being a deputy, about the uncle. Her voice was shaking now, rising. We don't have an uncle. Not anymore. Thomas frowned. What do you mean? Clara glanced toward the stairs where Samuel was sitting halfway up, listening. She motioned for him to come down, and he did, slowly, his small face tight with fear. Tell him, she said. Samuel looked down at his hands. Our uncle's the one who killed our parents. The words hung in the air like a gunshot. Thomas's stomach dropped. What? He wanted the land, Clara said, her voice flat, hollow. Our father's land. It was good land, near water, and our uncle wanted it. He came to the house one night with 2 other men. They set fire to the barn. When our parents ran out, her voice broke. They shot them. Samuel was crying now, silent tears streaming down his face. We were hiding in the cellar, Clara continued. We heard everything. When they left, we ran. We've been running ever since. Thomas felt something cold settle in his chest. And this deputy, he's working for our uncle, Clara said. He has to be. Our uncle has money. He can pay people to lie. Thomas swore under his breath. He walked to the window, staring out at the empty road. If that's true, he said slowly, then he's not going to stop looking. And if he finds you here, we'll leave, Clara said quickly. Tonight. We'll go somewhere else. We won't put you in danger. No, Clara blinked. What? Thomas turned to face her, his jaw set. You're not leaving. But that man out there, Thomas said, his voice hard. He's going to come back. And when he does, he's going to have questions. If you run now, that'll just confirm his suspicions. He'll track you down, and next time I won't be there to stop him. So what do we do? Thomas looked at the 2 of them. This girl and her brother, standing in his kitchen, scared and small and so damn fragile. And he made a choice. We fight, he said. That night, Thomas couldn't sleep. He sat in the chair by the window, rifle across his lap, watching the road by moonlight. The house was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that pressed down on your chest and made you think about all the things you'd lost, all the things you'd failed to protect. But upstairs, Clara and Samuel were safe. For now. That had to count for something. He heard soft footsteps on the stairs and turned to see Clara descending, wrapped in one of his old wool blankets. She hesitated when she saw him, then crossed the room and sat down in the other chair, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Couldn't sleep? Thomas asked. She shook her head. Samuel's asleep. But she stopped and sighed. I keep thinking he's going to come back. He will, Thomas said honestly, but not tonight. Clara looked at him, her eyes searching his face. Why are you doing this? Really? Thomas was quiet for a long time. Then he reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a small, tarnished locket. He opened it carefully, revealing two faded photographs inside, a woman with kind eyes and a little girl with dark braids. My wife, Margaret, he said, and my daughter, Emma. Clara leaned closer, studying the photographs. She looks like you. Thomas smiled faintly. She had her mother's stubbornness. What happened to them? Fever, Thomas said, came through the valley about 6 years ago. Took half the families within a week. I tried everything. Cold compresses, medicine from town, prayers. Nothing worked. He closed the locket with a soft click. I buried them under the cottonwood tree, built the crosses myself. Clara's voice was barely a whisper. I'm sorry. So am I. Thomas slipped the locket back into his pocket. For a long time after, I thought about giving up, selling the ranch, moving on. But I stayed, kept working, kept waking up every morning. I didn't know why. He looked at Clara, and something in his expression softened. Maybe I was waiting for this, he said, for a chance to protect someone again. Clara's eyes glistened, and she looked away quickly, swiping at her face with the back of her hand. We're not your family, she said quietly. No, Thomas agreed, but maybe you could be. Clara stared at him, her breath catching. You mean that? I mean it. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Clara stood, crossed the room, and wrapped her arms around Thomas's shoulders. He stiffened, surprised, and slowly brought one hand up to rest on her back. Thank you, she whispered. Thomas closed his eyes. You don't have to thank me. Yes, I do. The next morning, Thomas taught Samuel how to milk the cow. The boy was hesitant at first, unsure of where to put his hands, but Thomas showed him patiently, guiding his small fingers to the right position. Samuel's face lit up when the first stream of milk hit the bucket, and he laughed, a bright, clear sound that echoed through the barn. I did it, Samuel said, grinning up at Thomas. You did, Thomas agreed. Clara watched from the doorway, a small smile tugging at her lips. Later, they ate breakfast together at the kitchen table, eggs and bread and fresh milk. Samuel talked nonstop, asking questions about the animals, about the ranch, about everything. Clara didn't scold him this time. She just listened, smiling faintly, letting her brother be a kid for the first time in months. Thomas watched them both, and something in his chest loosened. This was what he'd been missing. That afternoon, Thomas found Clara in the workshop, running her hand over the dusty tools hanging on the wall. Your father teach you to use these? Thomas asked. Clara nodded. Some. He was a carpenter. He used to make furniture, cabinets. He was teaching me before. She stopped, swallowing hard. Before, Thomas picked up a small plane, blowing the dust off its surface. You remember how to use this? Clara took it from him, turning it over in her hands. I think so. Good. Thomas gestured to a stack of rough-cut lumber in the corner. I need a new shelf for the kitchen. Think you can help me build it? Clara blinked, surprised. Really? Really? They worked together through the afternoon, measuring and cutting and sanding. Clara was clumsy at first, her hands unsure, but Thomas guided her patiently, showing her how to hold the saw, how to feel the grain of the wood, how to let the tools do the work. By evening, they'd built a simple shelf, nothing fancy, but solid and straight. Clara stepped back, admiring their work, and a real smile broke across her face. We did it, she said. We did, Thomas agreed. She looked up at him, and for the first time since she'd arrived, there was no fear in her eyes, just gratitude. I don't know how to repay you, she said. Thomas shook his head. You don't owe me anything. But just stay, Thomas said. That's all I ask. Clara's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded. Okay, she whispered. That night, Thomas sat on the porch watching the sun. Samuel was beside him, swinging his legs off the edge of the steps, humming a tuneless melody. Mr. Mercer, the boy said. Yeah? Are we going to stay here forever? Thomas looked down at him. Would you like that? Samuel nodded seriously. I like it here. It's safe. It is, Thomas said. Oh, and you're nice, Thomas smiled faintly. I try. Samuel leaned against his side, and Thomas let him, resting one hand on the boy's shoulder. Inside, Clara was lighting the lamps, her silhouette moving past the window. The house glowed warm and golden against the deepening dusk. For the first time in years, Thomas's house felt like a home, but he knew it wouldn't last. The deputy returned on the 5th day. This time he wasn't alone. Thomas saw them coming from the pasture, 3 riders, moving fast, kicking up dust along the road. Deputy Cole was in the lead, and behind him rode two men Thomas didn't recognize. Both wore gun belts slung low, and their faces were hard, weathered, the kind of faces that belonged to men who'd lived rough and violent lives. Thomas dropped the rope he'd been coiling and ran toward the house. "Clara!" he shouted. "Get Samuel! Now!" Clara appeared in the doorway, already pale. She grabbed Samuel by the hand and pulled him inside. "Upstairs," Thomas said. "The crawl space in the back of the closet. Hide there and don't come out until I tell you." "What about you?" Clara asked, her voice shaking. "I'll handle it." "Thomas, go, go." She hesitated, then nodded and ran upstairs, dragging Samuel with her. Thomas grabbed his rifle from inside the door and stepped out onto the porch, levering a round into the chamber. He stood at the top of the steps, the rifle resting across his chest, and waited. The three riders reined to a stop in front of the house. Deputy Cole dismounted first, his expression calm, almost bored. The two men behind him stayed in their saddles, watching Thomas with flat, dead eyes. "Mr. Mercer," Cole said pleasantly, "didn't expect to see me again so soon. Did you, dear?" "I expected you," Thomas said evenly. "Smart man." Cole glanced toward the house. "See, the thing is, I've been asking around, talking to folks in town, and a few people mentioned they saw two kids on a swayback mare heading this way about a week ago." Thomas didn't respond. "Now, I'm not saying you lied to me," Cole continued, "but I am saying I'd like to take a look around, just to be sure." "You got a warrant?" Cole smiled. "Don't need one. I'm investigating a crime." "What crime?" "The abduction of two minors." Cole's smile widened. "Their uncle's real worried about them. He thinks someone might be holding them against their will." Thomas's grip on the rifle tightened. "That's a lie, and you know it." "Is it?" Cole took a step closer. "Then you won't mind if we search the house." "I do mind." Cole's expression hardened. "Step aside, Mercer." "No." For a moment the air was thick, suffocating. One of the men behind Cole shifted in his saddle, his hand drifting toward his gun. "You're making a mistake," Cole said quietly. "Maybe," Thomas said, "but it's my mistake to make." Cole studied him for a long moment, then sighed and shook his head. "All right, have it your way." He turned and nodded to the two men. They drew their guns. Thomas brought the rifle up fast, squeezing the trigger before the first man could clear his holster. The shot cracked through the air and the man jerked backward, clutching his shoulder, tumbling out of the saddle. The second man fired, and Thomas felt the bullet tear through his side, hot and sharp. He stumbled but didn't fall, levering another round and firing again. This time the man dropped, his horse rearing in panic. Cole had his gun out now, but Thomas was faster. He swung the rifle toward the deputy, finger on the trigger. "Drop it," Thomas said. Cole froze. "You're bleeding." "I'll live." "Maybe." Cole's eyes flicked toward the house. "But what about them?" Thomas's blood ran cold. "What?" Cole smiled. "You think I came here alone? You think I didn't plan for this?" From the side of the house, another man appeared. Older, stocky, with a scarred face and a revolver in his hand. He was dragging Clara by the arm, her face twisted in fury and fear. "Let her go," Thomas shouted. The man pressed the gun to Clara's head. "Drop the rifle, or I'll paint the ground with her brains." Thomas's heart hammered in his chest. His side was screaming in pain, blood soaking through his shirt, but none of that mattered. All that mattered was the girl. He lowered the rifle slowly, setting it on the porch. "Good," Cole said. "Now kick it away." Thomas did. Cole walked up the steps, calm and unhurried, and picked up the rifle. He glanced at the blood spreading across Thomas's side and shook his head. "You should have taken the money," he said. "Go to hell." Cole chuckled, then turned toward the man holding Clara. "Bring her here." The man shoved Clara forward, and she stumbled, falling to her knees. Cole grabbed her by the hair, yanking her upright. "Where's the boy?" he asked. Clara spat in his face. Cole backhanded her, and she fell again, blood trickling from her lip. Thomas lunged forward, but Cole swung the rifle around, slamming the butt into Thomas's jaw. He hit the ground hard, stars exploding across his vision. "Last chance," Cole said. "Where's the boy?" Clara looked up at Thomas, her eyes wide and terrified, and Thomas saw something in her gaze. "A question. Do I tell him?" Thomas shook his head just slightly. Clara's face hardened. She turned to Cole and smiled, blood staining her teeth. "You'll never find him," she said. Cole's jaw tightened. He raised the rifle, pointing it at her head. And then the gunshot rang out. And then the gunshot rang out. But it wasn't Cole who fired. The deputy staggered, a red bloom spreading across his chest. He looked down confused and collapsed. Behind him in the doorway of the barn stood an old man with a shotgun. Jacob Miller, Thomas's nearest neighbor, a man who lived 5 miles down the valley and rarely spoke to anyone. "Heard the shots," Jacob said, his voice gravelly. "Figured you might need help." 2 more men appeared behind him. Ranchers from the valley, men Thomas had traded with, shared meals with, men who knew what it meant to protect your own. The scarred man holding Clara turned to run, but one of the ranchers fired, and he dropped. The first man Thomas had shot was crawling toward his horse, clutching his bleeding shoulder. Jacob walked over, calm as anything, and pressed the barrel of his shotgun to the man's head. "You move, and I'll finish what he started," Jacob said. The man went still. They tied up the surviving men and sent word to the marshal in Silver Creek. It took 2 days for the law to arrive, and when they did, they brought news. Clara and Samuel's uncle had been arrested. Turned out several people had witnessed the murders, but he'd paid them off. When the truth came out, the whole thing unraveled. The children were free. Thomas spent those 2 days in bed, recovering from the bullet wound. Clara and Samuel didn't leave his side. Clara changed his bandages, brought him water, read to him from the old books on the shelf. Samuel sat on the edge of the bed, holding Thomas's hand, asking if he was going to die. "Not today," Thomas said. Samuel smiled. 3 weeks later, Thomas stood in the workshop with Clara, teaching her how to plane a piece of oak. "Slow strokes," he said. "Let the blade do the work." "Wait." Clara nodded, focusing intently, her tongue poking out between her teeth. She was getting better, stronger. The fear was still there, but it was fading, replaced by something steadier. Samuel was in the yard, throwing a stick for the dog they'd adopted from Jacob's ranch, a scruffy mutt with one ear and a wagging tail that never stopped. "Mr. Mercer," Clara said. "Yeah? Can I ask you something?" "Always." She set down the plane, wiping sawdust from her hands. Do you think we could stay? For good?" Thomas looked at her, this girl who'd stumbled into his life with nothing but her brother and a battered horse, and he felt something shift inside him. "I think," he said slowly, "that'd be just fine." Clara's face broke into a smile, wide, unguarded, real. "Thank you," she whispered. Thomas nodded. "Now come on, we've got a table to build." Years later, when Clara was grown and Samuel was taller than Thomas, they would sit on that same porch and watch the sun set over the valley. The ranch would be theirs by then, passed down the way things were meant to be passed down, from father to children. Clara would run her hand over the shelf they'd built together, still solid after all those years. And she'd remember the man who'd opened his door when the world had turned them away. And she'd think, he saved us. But Thomas, if he were still there to hear it, would have said something different. He would have said, "You saved me." Because sometimes when you open your home, you open your heart. And sometimes that's all it takes to heal.